poem at a summer solstice. This bridge, the one we all cross to more light, a bridge made purely of sun and earth, nowhere to be seen, only sensed. A brief but beautiful crossing, worth looking at the world from, worth looking out at the world from, looking at your moment in life from this bridge that spans our way to another season of fruitfulness, opens us to what's above and wide around us, without closing off all that's passing underneath, that suspends us in air like birds or clouds, anchors us in the bedrock of nature, holds us in a great balance and presence as we journey through our lengthening and shortening time. Welcome to the latest floating poetry broadcast, and thank you for leaning in to show 109 in my ongoing weekly series, coming to you live from the sun-crossed coast of New England. This is your poet and poetorialist Colin Goedecke, a voice for living our days more poetically, more expressively, more soulfully. In broadcast 108, we went into a world of fish and fishing, fishermen and women of literal and metaphorical kinds, mermaids included, from the beholding and the honoring to the catching and savoring and touchstoning to our living and being. This week we're making crossings of different kinds, not least taking, bridging, spanning yourself in body or spirit, emotionally or imaginatively, from some place, point, shore, territory, to a desired other one, and the reveals along the way. Through a cross-hatching of cultural commentary, poetry, inquiry, and discovery. Let's begin with this poem from the Mayan coast, from the Yucatan. Crossing the line between day and night. As the day leaves and night begins to set, a clothesline goes up overhead. To the west hangs a gown of peach, to the east a suit of lilac. The gown drapes the low-shouldered sun in a sheer and sensuous way. The lilac suit is all lapels, boutonniered with a branch of white hydrangea and stick-pinned with a silver moon, while its purple cuffs break just so over the sea. Mary Rueful's poem, Rain Effect. A bride and a groom sitting in an open buggy in the rain, holding hands but not looking at each other, waiting for the rain to stop, waiting for the marriage to begin, embarrassed by the rain, the effect of the rain on the bridal veil, the wet horse with his mane in his eyes, the rain cold as the sea deep as love. Big drops of rain falling on the leather seat, the rain beaded on a rose pinned to the groom's lapel, the rain on the bride's bouquet, on the baby's breath there, the sound of the rain hitting the driver's top hat, the rain shining like satin on the black street, on the tips of patent leather shoes. Hokusai's father, who polished mirrors for a living, Hokusai's father watching the sky for clouds, Hokusai's father's son drawing rain over a bridge and over the people crossing the bridge, Hokusai's father's son drawing the rain for hours, Hokusai's father rubbing a mirror, the rain cold as the sea cold as love, the sea swelling to a tidal wave at the tip of the wave white. Mary Rueful, Rain effect. Thank you for that. Thank her for that. Well, Walt Whitman's exuberant poem, Crossing Brooklyn Ferry. I'll just share the opening parts for us of this. Flood tide below me, I see you face to face. Clouds of the west, sun there half an hour high, I see you also face to face. Crowds of men and women attired in the usual costumes, how curious you are to me. On the ferry boats, the hundreds and hundreds that cross, returning home, are more curious to me than you suppose. And you that shall cross from shore to shore years hence are more to me, and more in my meditations than you might suppose. The impalpable sustenance of me from all things at all hours of the day, the simple, compact, well-joined scheme, myself disintegrated, everyone disintegrated, yet part of the scheme, the similitudes of the past and those of the future, the glories strung like beads on my smallest sights and hearings, on the walk in the street and the passage over the river, the current rushing so swiftly and swimming with me far away, the others that are to follow me, the ties between me and them, the certainty of others, the life, love, sight, hearing of others. Others will enter the gates of the ferry and cross from shore to shore. Others will watch the run of the flood tide. Others will see the shipping of Manhattan north and west and the heights of Brooklyn to the south and east. Others will see the islands large and small. 50 years hence, others will see them as they cross, the sun half an hour high. 100 years hence, or ever so many 100 years hence, others will see them, will enjoy the sunset, the pouring in of the flood tide, the falling back to the sea of the ebb tide. Thank you. Walt Whitman, Crossing Brooklyn Ferry. Much longer piece and lovely all the way through. So you might like to read that if you don't, if you haven't read it yet. Here's Crossing New Mexico with Weldon Keys, just the second part after Santa Fe, which is the first part. Second part is Albuquerque. This is a poem by Ray Gonzalez. The Sangre de Cristo mountains are old, and he is driving my car to the highest ridge, the valley below avoiding the bright moon, the same white light in the bay Keys wanted to touch before he left. Mist and clouds are a lie, he claims. Look down there, men are running away. He drives slowly to the top and we get out, the autumn sun burning terraces into scrub cedars and pinon pines he wrote about when he crossed here long ago, standing on the edge of the cliff as if this is the only way for him to go. Look past what you want to see, he sighs as the wind takes his slick hair and makes him into someone I have seen before. The streets of Albuquerque down there as dusty as his closed eyes. We stand on the edge, and I wait at this elevation with Keys, who wrote that the towns we will not visit are places where home truly lies. I must go, he decides. Where to, I ask. Any place you haven't seen, he says, and walks down the mountain. Thank you, Ray Gonzalez, for that. Well, take in perhaps the whole experience, if you will, of every place you travel across, you move through, whether it's simply a room or a yard, maybe a country or a body of water, or even a dreamscape. This was a poem one January in western New Jersey on the way to the woodlands. It's called A Canopy of Crows. As I sail from city to country, from the great metropolis toward a great sunset, all Titian, mauve, and violet, I pass under a canopy of crows, hundreds of sudden forms of sprung bodies and wings shaped like a fast-moving constellation of pitch-black stars, wheeling north as I cross away west. This poem of Galway Canals, Daybreak, brings us beautifully into nature and a mirroring of land with sky. This is from his collection, Mortal Acts, Mortal Words. Daybreak. On the tidal mud, just before sunset, dozens of starfishes were creeping. It was as though the mud were a sky, and enormous, imperfect stars moved across it as slowly as the actual stars cross heaven. All at once they stopped, and as if they had simply increased their receptivity to gravity, they sank down into the mud. They faded down into it and lay still. And by the time pink of sunset broke across them, they were as invisible as the true stars at daybreak. Thank you, Galway Canal. I do have questions for you, for us to contemplate among the varied crossings here. Let me ask you, what significant crossings have you made yourself, literally or figuratively? Across an ocean, a border, a mind or heartscape, or other territory, other terrain? Or what great or important crossroads have you come to, found yourself at over the years or decades, or maybe at right now, inside yourself, or in your outer journey? Who are some of the most interesting or mysterious or marvelous figures who've crossed through your world, through your life? What are your feelings about people, maybe some in particular, crossing over from this life to somewhere else, perhaps another realm or dimension, the great beyond? And how might we all, as a world, a society, a humanity, make a safe or safer crossing from where we are now, through all our shared challenges and uncertainties, to a place of peacefulness and regenesis? This next sharing I wrote for a friend's 50th birthday back in 1999. Jeffrey Jordan, I actually recently reconnected with, or about to reconnect with him. And well, apropos of him, as I saw and celebrated him then, is metaphorically relevant, in my opinion, to each of our own lives as we arc through them. This is crossing the Jordan. Crossing the river of your life for the 50th time, no step ever the same twice. The rich and rushing headstreams of light and possibility flowing down from the mountains of your soul and spirit, north to south, through a sea of Galilean memories, irrigating the great valley that lies all around you, creating for those who are thirsty or in need of anointing a sacred source, a place of sweet refreshment. Crossing the Jordan. James Langlas's poem, Crossing for His Father, he wrote this. Here the water reaches all things and flows endlessly, giving a touch to motion until it finally grips the branches, and they move beneath the current that takes me where it must, away from myself, across the sandy bottom, toward the one figure who will take me home. Thank you, James Langlas. El Luna, E-L-L-E, The Crossroads of Should and Must. Find and Follow Your Passion. This is a book that she wrote, an intelligent, illustrated field guide to finding your bliss, in which she says, should is how other people want us to live our lives. Choosing must is the greatest thing we can do with our lives. I totally subscribe to that. I actually have talked about a philosophy of nice to do, be or have, must do, be or have not. Of course, no, easily answered, but go for the musts. And here's what she says about that. Must is different. It's who we are, what we believe, and what we do when we are alone with our truest, most authentic self. It's that which calls us most deeply. It's our convictions, our passions, our deepest held urges and desires, unavoidable, undeniable, and inexplicable. Unlike should, must doesn't accept compromises. It's what happens when we stop conforming to other people's ideals and start connecting to our own, which allows us to cultivate our full potential as individuals. To choose must is to say yes to hard work and constant effort, to say yes to a journey without a roadmap or guarantees, and in so doing, to say yes to what Joseph Campbell called, quote, the experience of being alive, so that our life experiences are on the purely physical plane will have resonance within our innermost being and reality, so that we actually feel the rapture of being alive. Choosing must, she says, is the greatest thing we can do with our lives. So I'm agreed, and how about you? Shall we choose and live the musts, dear listeners? I think it's a good idea. And one way, one timeless way, I would say, to get to our must is to go within, to get quiet inside. Very quiet. I was musing on this especially and viscerally in the winter of 2016 when this poem came forth. It's called The Hibernaut. Burrows away, goes deep inside, slows down their emotional metabolism to enter another state under the skin, retreat into another rhythm, a hidden rhythm, months to years, however long it takes, to discover, cross over to other recesses of the self, often unfindable in the open air or on the outsides of the world's daily doings, its diverting comings and goings. To transition in a much lower modulation of heat, breath, beat of heart, through a freeze-framed change of season, life, weather. Then re-emerge, spring out at a right time, a natural knowing time, through sifted layers of stillness, darkness, and chill, into welcoming foyers of liveliness, newness, and thaw, with more freshness and growth, more self-presence and strength. The Hibernaut. There was a surgeon, I'm sure he's still alive, as Atul Gawande, who wrote a book called Being Mortal, Medicine and What Matters in the End. It's a surgeon on the crossroads between our bodies and our inner lives and what really matters in the end. And for him, he said, dying confers upon living, quote, the courage to act on the truth we find. I wanted to share this because it's another kind of crossroads. I was sort of hinting at it or mentioning at the beginning. Crossing over from this life. Death, he says, is not a failure. It's normal. It may be the enemy, but it is also the natural order of things. You don't have to spend much time with the elderly or those with terminal illness to see how often medicine fails the people it's supposed to help. The waning days of our lives are given over to treatments that addle our brains and sap our bodies for a sliver's chance of benefit. They are spent in institutions, nursing homes, and in ICUs where regimented, anonymous routines cut us off from all the things that matter to us in life. Our reluctance to honestly examine the experience of aging and dying has increased the harm we inflict on people and denied them the basic comforts they most need. Lacking a coherent view of how people might live successfully all the way to their very end, we have allowed our fates to be controlled by the imperatives of medicine, technology, and strangers. I have the writer's and scientist's faith that by pulling back the veil and peering in close, a person can make sense of what is most confusing or strange or disturbing. And he speaks in the book about his grandfather and what a contrast that culture that he comes from, his grandfather came from, handled human finitude. He said he was surrounded and supported by family at all times, and he was revered, not in spite of his age, but because of it. He was consulted on all important matters, marriages, land disputes, business decisions, and occupied a place of high honor in the family. When we ate, we served him first. When young people came into his home, they bowed and touched his feet in supplication. But in America, he would almost certainly have been placed in a nursing home. If to be human is to be limited, then the role of caring professions and institutions, from surgeons to nursing homes, ought to be aiding people in their struggle with those limits. Sometimes we can offer a cure, sometimes only a salve, sometimes not even that. But whatever we can offer, our interventions and the risks and sacrifices they entail are justified only if they serve the larger aims of a person's life. Thank you. Well, go on to, and if you're interested in his book, again, is Being Mortal. Here's Donald Hall's poem, A Sister on the Tracks. Between pond and sheep barn, by maples and watery birches, Rebecca paces a double line of rust in a sandy trench, striding on black creosoted 8x8s. In 1943, war trains skidded tanks, airframes, dynamos, searchlights, and troops to Montreal. She counted cars from the stopped hayrack at the endless crossing. 99, 100, and her grandfather, Ben's voice shaking with rage and oratory, told how the mighty Boston and Maine kept the State House in its pocket. Today, Rebecca walks a line that vanishes in solitude, bypassed by wars and commerce. She remembers the story of the buntinged day her great-great-great-grandmother watched the first train roll and smoke from Potter Place to Gale, with fireworks, cider, and speeches. Then the long rail drove west, buzzing and humming. The hive of rolling stock extended a 1,000-card perspective from Ohio to Oregon, where men who left stone farms rode rails toward gold. On this blue day she walks under a high jet's glint of swooped aluminum pulling its feathery contrail westward. She sees ahead how the jet dies into junk and highway wastes like railroad. Beside her, the old creation retires, hayrack sunk like a rowboat under its fields of hay. She closes her eyes to glimpse the vertical track that rises from the underworld of graves, soul's ascension connecting dead to unborn, rails that hum with a hymn of continual vanishing where tracks cross. For she opens her eyes to read on a solitary gravestone next to the rails the familiar names of Ruth and Matthew Bott, born in a Norfolk parish, who ventured the immigrants' passionate exodus westward to labor on their own land. Her love builds its mortal house, where today's wind carries a double scent of heaven and cut hay. Thank you, Donald Hall, A Sister on the Tracks. Well, around mortality, I reflected back on the terminal illness of my most beloved Uncle Hugh years ago, and his decline, and I felt then his coming absence so strongly and poignantly one September day. And then this poem flowed into me, The Clock Tower and the Pall Bearer. It's a poem from New York City, 2002. The solemn striking of the 11th hour from the village clock tower, as I crossed the avenue alongside my uncle in his wheelchair, feeling just then like a pallbearer in his funeral cortege. Everything alive but foreboding and slowly tolling, dead. Well, I do believe there's a great beyond of some kind, and to me other dimensions alongside our own familiar ones, aside, and call them what you will. I've had experiences of various ones that have shown me they do exist. And I wanted to touch on one here, a Celtic one, in this All Hallows Eve piece that I wrote a few years back for the Celtic day known as Samhain. It's actually spelled Samhain. The end of harvest time, when Celts led their cattle down from their summer pastures, when sacred bonfires were set immensely alight beneath the also burning stars, to cleanse and protect. A liminal time to cross easily to the other world and make way for the spirits, the fairies, the Eosi, to enter this one, bring their good fortune to farmers and crops, livestock and lovers, and receive and return grateful offerings of food and drink. A hallowed time when departed souls revisited their earthly homes seeking comfort. Long gone kin were beckoned and welcomed to places set for them at tables of the living, whose faces glowed in soft pools of waxing candlelight. When mumming and guising surprised the openers of neighboring doors, and people in costume or full disguise recited verses to the ready lookers and listeners, and left rewarded with bits of sweet and other treats. And many played games with apples and hazelnuts in the first frosted autumn air. And all marked the turn toward solstice and winter, found solace in their deep-rooted symbols, their comforting rituals, embraced the arriving dark half of the year, and their spoken and silent passages through these realms of myth and mystery. Samhain. I felt a nod to Thoreau was in order for our program. His thoughts on friendship, consciousness, and seeing kinship across our creaturely differences. He said a man is commonly a locked-up chest to us, to open whom, unless we have the key of sympathy, will make our hearts bleed. Well, this a few notes from the Marginalian about it. They say he considers the essence of friendship, what it means to be human, and how inextricably connected we are to our fellow non-human beings who are just as worthy of our sympathy and respect as our human friends. Well, I encourage you to have a read through it. The Journal of Henry David Thoreau, 1837 to 1861. Well, that took me back to a poem I hadn't read in quite some time that I wrote for a deeply dear friend, and among other things, the kind of vital friend in our time together I was able to be for that person, and maybe a kind of friend you may have been for another. This is called a stepping stone. I'm glad to have been a stepping stone, often a skipping stone, for the wide river you had to cross, the deep life waters you had to traverse, from the near side of hiddenness to the far side of wholeness, where you could then travel on, more freely, sure-footedly, into the future. What also came to mind was a piece I wrote then in my head because I was driving. I couldn't write, but I was holding the lines in my head as I used to do until I could write things down. This was way before the iPhone or having a small recorder in my pocket. So this was motoring along the Baltimore-Washington Parkway to Washington, D.C. one autumn. And it's about those who cross out of our lives, though not out of our consciousness or memory. It's called Fallen Off the Map. Like thriving byways back in time and places you once called home or set your heart or sights on, people who used to be contiguous with you, share an open border, can fade slowly or fall suddenly off the map of your life, disappear with all their color and contours, elevations and scale from your personal geography, your mappa mundi, to be or not to be, or only distantly, sometimes wistfully remembered. Fallen off the map. I was thinking about certain intrepid figures back in time I'm aware of that traversed all sorts of incredible terrains like the Alps. And I was thinking, aside from Hannibal, who crossed the Alps in 218 BC with elephants, you may remember that story, and to catch the Roman army by surprise, which he did, and Napoleon doing that again, crossing them likewise in 1800 without elephants. Well, I've been fascinated for a long time by Ötzi, also known as the Iceman, and I went over to National Geographic, and I was curious what they would tell me about him anecdotally, and the two things that jumped out was what he carried when he traversed the Alps and died there, perfectly preserved in 3400 BC. The Iceman trekked through the Itzl Alps with a wood-frame backpack and a deerskin quiver with 20 arrow shafts, only 2 of which had arrowheads. His flint dagger was sharpened with a tool fashioned from lime tree wood and a fire-hardened antler tip. A birch bark container, similar to those still made in the region today, held smoldering charcoal wrapped in fresh maple leaves that would have allowed him to quickly make a fire. One of the most important objects is Ötzi's sublime copper axe, secured to a U-handle with cow leather and birch tar. The blade was cast from a mold and is 99.7% pure copper, an extraordinarily wealthy item for the time, and its discovery pushed back the beginning of the European Copper Age by 1,000 years. His last meal, in the hours before his death, Ötzi had a hearty meal of einkorn wheat, red deer, and ibex. You don't know about him. There's photographs that reconstructed him. Absolutely fascinating story about him and how intrepid he was, crossing all sorts of territories, long and harsh. Well, there was a poem I wrote, Locomotively. This was dedicated, and maybe an echo perhaps, of our Iceman, Ötzi. It was, and when I was poet laureate, which I still am, actually, for the Truth Foundation of the United States, I created a large poetorial body of written, spoken, music, and musically scored and visual poetry for the 2018 Winter Olympic Games. And that poetorial honored each sport and Olympian, among other things. And this was just one of the poems. This was dedicated to the Olympic cross-country skiers. And if you go to my site, thepoetorialist.com, and you look up, there's a segment on this particular poetorial for the Pyeongchang Winter Games. You will see all the material and imagery, the visual poetry. So, locomotively. Your body a great engine, full steaming through deeply beautiful snowscapes, moving in long forward strides, tracking side to side, limbs, lungs, and spokes working so locomotively in all-part harmony, the way Scandinavians traveled with fort and fire through their frozen worlds 5 millennia ago. Well, all of this led me to some material about famous vintage modes of travel and famous train trips. I thought I'd share a couple of those with you. The lonelyplanet.com talked about the Beijing to Lhasa Express in China. Distance 2,330 miles, duration 40 hours, linking the futuristic architecture and imperial wonders of Beijing with the dreamlike monasteries and palaces of Lhasa. The train transports its passengers from the neon lights of urban China to a once remote land of magenta-robed monks, where the air is heady with the aroma of incense and yak butter candles. As it chugs westward, the train climbs nearly 16,000 feet on its journey to the roof of the world, the Tibetan Plateau, where it glides past grazing yaks, fluttering prayer flags, snow-capped mountains, and boundless blue skies. On board, passengers slurp noodles and play cards with their bunkmates. Well, how about that? I haven't gone on that, but I did go on this next one, which is the Flying Scotsman. It's the Caledonian sleeper train from London to Fort William, Scotland, and the Scottish Highlands. It takes about 13 and a half hours, 500 miles. It's an amazing ride, dramatic and wonderful, and it epitomizes the romance of rail travel. And the National Geo says it's just a pity the whole experience, from buffet car banter and single malt nightcaps to being lulled into la-la land by the rhythm of the rails and waking to bedside views of towering granite peaks, feels like it's over in a flash. Well, my friends, since taking it, I can tell you it was splendid and memorable, and I don't recall it going so flashing by, and I do remember putting my head out the window as we rolled over an ancient aqueduct bridge. So I'm not surprised it's considered Britain's best train ride. I think it's still going, so you may want to, if you're out that way in the world, leap aboard, step aboard. Yeah, there were other trains you might want to read about. The Trans-Siberian Express. During the Cold War, that train went 5,000 miles from Moscow to Vladivostok, and Westerners could travel only in compartments where they were subjected to Stalinist propaganda played on loudspeakers. The Blue Train between Cape Town and Pretoria, South Africa, is still going since 1939. Blue locomotives, railroad cars, and leather seats. And all sorts of other trains, so I won't carry on about that too much more, but it's a favorite topic of mine. Atlantic crossings are fascinating to me. Back in time, by 1870, more than 90% of immigrants to America arrived by steamship. And in that same period, the American economy prospered, and a class of wealthy Americans was eager to travel in luxury. So steamship companies designed their finest accommodations with those passengers in mind, while rich and poor crossed the ocean just a few decks apart during some of those times. Pacific crossings, which started in 1867, the Pacific Mail Steamship Company established a line from Hong Kong to San Francisco, and it carried American merchants, missionaries, and government officials to Asia, but the company made most of its money ferrying Chinese laborers to and from the United States. I've shared before my poem about my own experience as a very young boy, seeing my grandmother off on a voyage, a transatlantic voyage. Still vivid memory back in my time, in my youth, my extreme youth. But I have other poems to get to. It's called Lillian and Mary, so I have it on other shows, or if you'd like to hear it or have me send it to you, you let me know. You send me an email. So we have all these literal forms of passages, and what about the metaphorical? I want to come back to the metaphorical ones and rites of passage, and I thought of one, and ones I was moving through very challengingly back in 2016, and was also wondering what dear listeners of yours. This is called a narrow passage. Fjords and rapids right now, nowhere else to go but through. Past sirens too, like Odysseus, like Jason of the Argonauts, resisting their beautifully dangerous song, resisting being lured onto the rocks of others' headlands, islands. The passage may be alarmingly narrow, but I feel in my marrow I will make it through to the open, welcome waters where the sailing will be wide, will be safe. For now I must keep playing the lyre of my spirit, resoundingly, reassuringly enough to drown out all other beckoning, beguiling, but shipwrecking voices. Narrow passage. Alfred Lord Tennyson's classic, Crossing the Bar. Sunset and evening star, and one clear call for me, and may there be no moaning of the bar when I put out to sea. But such a tide as moving seems asleep, too full for sound and foam, when that which drew me from out the boundless deep turns again home. Twilight and evening bell, and after that the dark, and may there be no sadness of farewell when I embark. For though from out our bourne of time and place the flood may bear me far, I hope to see my pilot face to face when I have to cross the bar. Alfred Lord Tennyson. Well, on a playful and romantic note is a regular crossing of the Atlantic I would make in 2016, in this case not the ocean, but an avenue crossing the Atlantic. There's always a kiss before crossing, however heavy or light the seas. Today, visibility is good. You can't see Spain or Southampton, but you can see the shore of Brooklyn Heights, where we flaneur for this leg of our petit bon voyage, until we return, where we kiss again upon crossing back over the long white waves to the familiar coast and terra cognita of Cobble Hill. James Scruton's poem, Crossing the Days. My son's been learning time, big hand and little, powers of 60 and of 24, the slow semaphore of days. He's brought home paper plates from kindergarten, arrows pointing at his favorite hours. So far the face of every clock has smiled. And before we read to sleep each night, he crosses off another square on the calendar above his bed, counting down to Christmas or to nothing in particular, sometimes just a line he draws uphill or down, check marks like the ones his teacher leaves on sheets he's filled with capitals and lower cases. Other times a pair of thick lines like the crossed bones on a pirate's flag, an X as if to mark the treasure buried in some ordinary week, no day yet across to bear. Thank you, James Scruton, for that one. Well, for 30 plus years I lived, some of you know, on Central Park West in New York City, and it was like my garden, my great garden, and I was always there, walking all the time, in all seasons, sometimes bicycling, in all weathers, and at times with my then wife and later a very great love. And this poem was from September of 1997, Our pas de deux in the park. Warm hand pulls warm hand over the smoothed wooden bridge to catch the firelight, the sunset heating window panes across the mum dusk water, orange eyes dilating to torches that dance and depart, crickets castanetting in the treetops, and the last of the fireflies lighting the path in this leafy green flamenco night as we pas de deux in the park. Just doing a little last minute editing so we stay in good time. This is Pat Emile's poem, They Danced Through Grinnellis. He finds her near the stack of green plastic baskets waiting to be filled and circles her waist with his left arm, entwines her fingers in his, pulls her toward him. Music from the ceiling shedding a flashy salsa, and as they begin to move, she lets her head fall back, fine hair swinging a beat behind as they follow their own music, a waltz, past the peaches bursting with ripeness in their wicker baskets, the prawns curled into each other behind cold glass, a woman in a turquoise sari, her dark eyes averted. They twirl twice before the imported cheeses, fresh mozzarella in its milky liquid, goat cheese sent down from some green mountain, then glide past ranks of breads, seeds spread across brown crusts, bottles of red wine nested together on their sides. He reaches behind her, slides a bouquet of cut flowers from a galvanized bucket, tosses a 20 to the teenaged boy leaning on the wooden counter, and they whirl out the door, the blue sky a sudden surprise. Lovely. Pat Emile, thank you. They dance through Grinnellis. Sophie Jewell's poem 1910 opens with a quote by W.B. Yeats. I have read somewhere that the birds of fairyland are white as snow. Where all the trees bear golden flowers, and all the birds are white, where fairy folk in dancing hours burn stars for candlelight, where every wind and leaf can talk, but no man understands save one whose child feet chance to walk green paths of fairyland. I followed two swift silver wings. I stalked a roving song. I startled shining, silent things. I wandered all day long. But when it seemed the shadowy hours whispered of soft-foot night, I crept home to sweet, common flowers, brown birds, and candlelight. Thank you, Sophie Jewell. Well, we're coming down to our last few things now. Francine Sterling's poem, From Every Bird is One Bird, her collection. This is called Making a Cross. Of 385 varieties, to make the simplest, all you need are 2 sticks, one vertical, the other horizontal. Call one time, one space, or life, death, good, evil, male, female, you choose. Any polarity will do as long as the cross piece cuts across the one upright. Now, it's a human form with arms outstretched. Rub them together. A couple of sparks, a few more. A flash of light, a slow increase in heat, and radiating around you, uncontainable fire. Thank you, Francine Sterling. This is the story poem for one of the many characters in my theater on paper, brought to life in color from my experiential exhibition behind the curtain. It's called Crossing. You, like this or another figure, reconfigure yourself as you cross each new frontier of self. Leave each old veneer of self, whether in light or shadow, through forests, seas, or deserts. Whether you're young and callow or older and mellow. It's these crossroads we come to, move through, that offer us pauses for deeper reflection, create points of great inflection, expansion. So we might emerge on the other side, another side, reformed, refined, or newly revealed to ourselves and to the world. W.S. Merwin's poem, Hearing, back when it took all day to come up from the curving broad ponds on the plains where the green-winged jacanas ran on the lily pads, easing past tracks at the mouths of gorges, crossing villages, silted in hollows in the foothills, each with its lime-washed church by the baked square of red earth and its talkers eating fruit under trees, turning a corner and catching sight at last of inky forests far above, steep as faces with the clouds stroking them and the glimmering airy valleys opening out of them. Waterfalls still roared from the folds of the mountain, white and thundering, and spray drifted around us, swirling into the broad leaves and the waiting boughs. Once I took a tin cup and climbed the slewest rocks and mossy branches beside one of the high falls, looking up step by step into the green sky from which rain was falling. When I looked back from a ledge, there were only dripping leaves below me and flowers. Beside me, the hissing cataract plunged into the trees. Holding on, I moved closer. Left foot on a rock in the water, right foot on a rock in deeper water at the edge of the fall. Then, from under the weight of my right foot came a voice like a small bell, singing over and over one clear treble syllable. I could feel it move. I could feel it ring in my foot, in my skin, everywhere, in my ears, in my hair. I could feel it in my tongue and in the hand holding the cup. As long as I stood there, it went on without changing. When I moved the cup, still it went on. When I filled the cup in the falling columns, still it went on. When I drank, it rang in my eyes through the thunder curtain. When I filled the cup again, when I raised my foot, still it went on, and all the way down, from wet rock to wet rock, green branch to green branch, it came with me, until I stood looking up, and we drank the light water, and when we went on, we could still hear the sound as far as the next turn on the way over. Thank you, W.S. Merwin, for that. Hearing. Crossing the red brick terrace to bed is a touchstone to a wildly happy place I had loved at the ocean, place of my own in East Hampton, New York. This was June of 2002. And as we come soon into summer again, crossing the red brick terrace to bed, the incense of honeysuckle and half-moon, the night dark stars of ivy, the upholstered shapes of hedges and cedars, the cool midnight stillness, the nearness of the sea, of the summer. And next to last, For You, For Us. It's a poem by Jericho Brown, Crossing. The water is one thing, and one thing for miles. The water is one thing, making this bridge built over the water another. Walk it early, walk it back when the day goes dim, everyone rising just to find a way toward rest again. We work, start on one side of the day like a planet's only sun, our eyes straight until the flame sinks. The flame sinks. Thank God I'm different. I've figured and counted. I'm not crossing to cross back. I'm set on something vast. It reaches long as the sea. I'm more than a conqueror, bigger than bravery. I don't march. I'm the one who leaps. Thank you, Jericho Brown. Crossing. And we'll close our time and crossings here for now with On the Verge. On the shore, on the threshold, on the frontier of a new year, of possible leavings, steppings, crossings you greatly want or greatly need to make to places of larger being that are calling, may have long been calling, cannot go unheeded. Places of wider opening, deeper engaging that are waiting. Places you and your knowing soul belong. Thank you again for leaning in, floating in, and feeling in, and for your generous appreciations of all kinds, from sharing these shows with others to commenting to donating. If you'd like to offer a thought, compliment, or question, my email is colin@thepoetorialist.com. To say thanks with a contribution, you can donate by Venmo to Fivefold, Fivefold, at pipeline.com, or by PayPal, or directly through my site, thepoetorialist.com, and the Donate tab. Or by mail to me at P.O. Box 1032 Westerly, Rhode Island 02891. Patrons do host me from time to time as a working artist, a poet in residence on a given property for a set time. This summer, autumn, or winter, to create a new flight of poetic art and dedicate it to you if you're interested and infuse my poetic spirit. Well, if you'd like to offer such a residency, reach out and let's discuss the opportunity. I'm also glad to be a virtual artist in residence, a poetic presence for select online communities. Meanwhile, you can hear all the broadcasts online, on YouTube, on the floating poetry playlist. I hope you'll lean in soon again. Until then, dear listeners, a toast to all your literal and life crossings. May they be meaningful, and may they be memorable, wherever they take you, land you, lead you, and reveal to you on the way. Goodbye for now, and good spirits.